All right, folks. So as we begin our message time this morning, I want us to take a moment and ponder a question. So when you hear the word stewardship, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Serving. Giving. Anything else? Helping. Okay. All of those are good responses. I'm kind of surprised nobody said money, because normally when we, just as I just did, when we talk about stewardship in the church, many people just associate stewardship with money, right? And many churches will often hold stewardship campaigns every year. They'll spend times doing series on stewardship every year because, again, giving and tithing and offerings are important parts of the life of the church. But friends, we're going to spend some time over the next couple weeks talking about different aspects of stewardship, because as you have already alluded to, yes, stewardship encompasses money, but it also encompasses so much more than that. It does include things like service and our time and our material possessions. So as we begin this series, then, one of the things that I want us to do is to begin to confront a very powerful perspective or mentality that oftentimes leads us into trouble, okay? And that is the difference between being an owner versus being a steward, okay? Now, I know you don't have dictionaries right in front of you, but how would you define an owner? Well, generally, if you're an owner, you think you have possession or you have control of something, right? That it's yours, all right? Now, the difference between an owner and a steward is that the steward sees the job as management or responsible care for the things of the owner, right? And so if you were to go back and do a little history of the word steward or stewardship, you would find that it was almost actually like a legal job description at one time. Someone who would go back and manage or care for an estate or a household, and that steward would oversee different functions within that estate or that household. But one of the things that I would encourage us to do is to change that definition just slightly and to see stewardship as the careful and responsible management of resources, right? And those resources may include our money, it may include our material possessions, but it also includes things like time, and also care for each other, care for God's creation. And so it's much broader than we often give it credit for. Now, again, as we go back to that owner versus steward mentality, we get into trouble when we think that we're owners of things, because it gives us sort of this false sense of control, and it can lead us into problems. We can utilize that. We can become greedy, or we can move into scarcity thinking we don't have enough, or I don't have this, or I don't have that, or this is mine and it's not yours and I'm going to do this. You don't have a right to this thing because it's mine. But friends, as we read through the scriptures broadly, we find that, again, God is the one that provides everything that we have in life, right? That there's not one thing, whether it's the air that we breathe, the money that's in our wallets, the clothes that are on our bodies, that God is the one that has provided and given us those materials, and we are but caretakers of the resources that He has given us. And so, friends, one of the things that I want us to do is to, again, sort of refresh this idea of stewardship, because oftentimes, even in the church, people are moving away from this idea of stewardship, right? They want to go and look at words like caring or generosity or other things because they think stewardship is sort of archaic. But friends, it's a very powerful example of the role that God gives us, right? And think about that just for a minute, if you will. Think about even the story of Adam and Eve, right? God gives or presents the garden for Adam and Eve to care for, right? They're to name the animals. They're to do certain things within it. There's a level of governance, of management and care for God's creation that God gives the first two people. All right, and that carries out throughout the entire Scriptures. And hopefully over the next few weeks then, we'll be able to look at some of those different facets of or aspects of our lives and see how we might more fully live into those. So, friends, we are obviously on week 1 of this series, and we're going to be talking this week about what it means to give our first fruits. But then over the next couple of weeks, like I said, we're going to talk about being stewards of our time, being stewards of our stuff, and also being stewards of our creation and care for humanity and the people of our lives. So friends, this morning I'm going to go back and I'm going to read a scripture from the Old Testament, and almost immediately you're going to wonder why I've chosen a book of the law to read to you when it comes to stewardship and to giving, because oftentimes, again, we have that negative connotation of, oh, this is only money, and oh, there's all these rules around it, and how do we do this, and how do we do that? But friends, even in this book of the law, I hope that you'll see that even in the expression that stewardship and giving is much broader than simple black and white rules. So let's hear from chapter 26, verses 1 through 15. I invite you to open your pew Bibles, or if you have a Bible app on your phone, feel free to open that up and to follow along. It says, "So when you have entered the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and have taken possession of it and settled in it, take some of the first fruits of all that you have produced from the soil of the land the Lord your God is giving to you, and put them in a basket. Then go to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, and say to the priest in office at the time, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come to the land the Lord swore to our ancestors to give us. The priest shall take the basket from your hands and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. Then you shall declare before the Lord, my father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down to Egypt with a few people and lived there and became a great nation, powerful and numerous. But the Egyptians mistreated us and made us suffer, subjecting us to harsh labor. Then we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our misery, toil, and oppression. So the Lord brought us up out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terror and signs and wonders. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now I bring the first fruits of the soil that you, Lord, have given me. Place the basket before the Lord your God and bow down before him. Then you and the Levites and the foreigners residing among you shall rejoice in all the good things the Lord your God has given you and your household. When you have finished setting aside 1/10 of all of your produce in the 3rd year, the year of the tithe, you shall give it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Then say to the Lord your God, I have removed from my house the sacred portion and have given it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, the widow, according to all that you commanded. I have not turned aside from your commands, nor have I forgotten any of them. I have not eaten any of the sacred portion while I was in mourning, nor have I removed any of it while I was unclean, nor have I offered any of it to the dead. I have obeyed the Lord my God. I have done everything you commanded me. Look down from heaven, your holy dwelling place, and bless your people Israel, in the land that you have given us as you promised on oath to our ancestors, a land flowing with milk and honey. So friends, as we begin to unpack some of the things within that scripture, one of the things that stands out again is this idea that really all that we have in life is a means of grace, right? That God is the one who has initiated first, and God has supplied us with all that we have. Now, some of you might be arguing, well, yeah, I don't know if I agree with that, Josh, because I work 40 hours a week for the things that I have, and I've worked really hard to acquire all of these things. But my immediate argument to be, well, again, who gives you the breath in your lungs? Who gives you the energy? Who gave you the body and the skills and the gifts to go out and work that job so that you could acquire all of these things that you think you need, right? And so, friends, as we mature in our faith, we understand, and again, there's this idea of gratitude at the very beginning of what it means to be a steward, right? To look at God's creation and everything in it and say, man, are we blessed to have the things that we have? Now, I do want to be sensitive in that comment, because we know that there are people in this country, people in this world that do not have the abundance that we have, right? And they may question, or we may even question, well, how is it that they have nothing? Where is God for these people that seem to lack even the basic necessities in fulfillment of needs in their lives, right? And that can be a little bit of a difficult question, but even in that, I believe that God is still at work, and people can move into gratitude even in the most dire of situations and circumstances. Okay? So the other major theme then in these first few verses is this idea of first fruits. Right? And it's very simply this idea that we give back to God from what we immediately received or have created, and we don't give God the leftovers, right? We don't give God, well, I've got a few bucks in my pocket from, last night while I was out doing whatever, and I'll just throw that in the offering plate, right? No, it's this idea that we are to set aside the very first bit of our resources to dedicate that to God as an act of worship, okay? Now, when it comes to first fruits, friends, again, I'll put it in a much more contemporary way. And so if you go into financial circles, and again, I'm going to base this more on the money aspect than other things this morning, because it's just simply a little bit easier to convey it in those terms. But oftentimes, if you go into financial circles, one of the things you'll hear people like Dave Ramsey and other people say is that you should live by an 80-20 rule, or you should live by an 80-10-10 rule. All right, and so basically what that means is that your lifestyle should be based off of 80% of your income. All right, and then there should be, at least I like the second one better, 10% should be a savings, right? That you save this, you create a fund in case of emergencies, or you potentially can even look for other opportunities with that. And then the other 10% is what you give. It's your offering and your tithe, okay? And so one of the things you do, or, Dave Ramsey with his envelopes will say is like, as soon as you get your paycheck, you take your envelopes out and you put your 10% here, you put your 10% here, and you put the other 80% here, right? And friends, I think that is a very powerful illustration of what it means to give first fruits, because it doesn't take long to notice that there's a whole bunch of people, specifically in this country, that live paycheck to paycheck, right? And they're only one accident, one medical illness or procedure away, and they're so leveraged, they have so much debt, they have no savings, that they risk bankruptcy or major financial problems because they live paycheck to paycheck. And if that paycheck is ever interrupted, they're in big trouble. Okay? And again, when we live beyond our means, it can sometimes be, well, I'm not going to say sometimes. It's very difficult if we're living beyond our means to save or to tithe, right? Because all of our money, all of our resources are going to trying to live some sort of lifestyle that we need. But friends, think about the power of taking that initial 10% and saying, you know what? Before I spend a dime, before I pay my bills, before I go grocery shopping, before I do anything, this 10% is going back to God, because I want to thank God for the resources that I have been given. All right. And so this idea of first fruits is very important, and I hope that it will serve as sort of the basis for us when we think about the other aspects of stewardship in our life. So again, what does first fruits look like with your money? What does first fruits look like with your time? What does first fruits look like when we care for each other, our community, and in the creation that we live in? All right. Now, along with this idea of gratitude is the connection to the story, right? And so in these verses 4 through 8, we hear the story of the Hebrew people going down into Egypt, and we know the story of Moses going down and leading them out, right? And this is a major narrative. It's a major point of reference for the Hebrew people because of their experience there. And the reason that they come before the priest and they say, you know, my father was a wandering Aramean and he went down into Egypt and blah, 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 is because they're recalling that story. They're recalling God's grace and provision in one of the most difficult times in their life, right? Now, it also serves as a reminder of the potential dangers for them as they move into their own land, right? Because they were foreigners in a strange land. They were in some ways marginalized from the Egyptian people. And it didn't take long for the Egyptians to begin to oppress them and see themselves not as stewards or caretakers of a people that had come to them in distress, or even people that had come and aided them through a time of famine. But now all of a sudden they said, you know what? Well, we see these people as a resource, and we're going to seek to control them and use them for our own purposes, to do the things that we want. And so, friends, it serves as a warning then for the Hebrew people to say, look, you have to be careful as you have foreigners come into your land and you witness the people that are on the margins, that you do not become the oppressors. Okay? And so, friends, not only do we get to tie back into the rich stories that are within our scriptures, but we also get to look back over the course of our own lives. Right? Just as I asked the kids, what's God doing in your life? Right? We can look back through the course of our life and say, you know what, God, you have been so good. Even through some of the darkest trials and tribulations that we've experienced in our life, you have been good. You have been with me every step of the way, and you've moved me from this dark place to here. Friends, if you're in a dark place right now, guess what? Just hold on tight. Keep that faith, because I do believe God will move you through that. That doesn't mean it's just going to snap and everything is going to get better and be exactly the way you expect. But God will do miraculous things in and through that experience. So this then leads to the next point, that as we give these first fruits, it's a time to rejoice, right? It's a time to be in gratitude and to remember that good work, but it's also the opportunity to bear witness to the people around us of the provision, of the abundance, of the blessings of God that we have been given. All right? And so, again, friends, one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and one of the things that Sarah and I tend to give some of our resources to, is I love people that are looking for the opportunity to go out and do ministry. Right? So like when Jenna came to us and she was looking to go on mission, I was really excited to be able to partner with her and say, you know what? Because Sarah and I have been blessed, you know, we can give you some money to go and do that mission. You know, we've had a couple people that are part of what used to be Campus Crusade for Christ. They're part of Crew now. But that same thing, they come to us and they come tell us their story, and it's so fun to see how excited and passionate they are to go out and to do ministry in that way. And so it's been just an honor and a privilege to say, you know what, yeah, you know, we can give you some money to go do that. We can give you some resources to be able to go out and do that. Or as we look at things like, I know Sarah and I do Compassion International. What was the one that you guys did for the young boy that you guys sponsored? I put her on the spot. Anyway, you know, those organizations that work with, you know, children and youth to provide them funding and resources, or even our Operation Christmas Child that looks to take and utilize some of the resources that we have so that we can be a witness and an influence to people in other parts of the world, right? And so this is another image in the power and the responsibility that we have as Christians when it comes to our giving, right? But oftentimes we can kind of get in this negative space where we say, well, you know what? I don't feel like giving to that, or these are mine, or I work really hard for this, or I'm tired of the church always asking for my money and I don't want to give that, and this and that. Like, I've heard a whole bunch of stuff, even from family members, right? I don't want to go to church because all they do is ask me for money, right? Direct quote from one of my family members. Now, friends, again, it is true that there are certain things that the church needs to do, right? The church does need to be a steward of the building that we worship in. Thankfully, the church also has to provide me an income so that I can do the work for you. But it becomes hard sometimes for churches when it seems like all of the money is going to keep the lights on and to pay the pastor. Right? It's tough to keep giving when that seems to be the only thing that goes on. And so, again, it's important that we also go out and say, yes, but we're also doing these things. We're giving generously enough so that we can continue to do the missions and ministry that God is calling us to do. And as we do that, we bear witness to God. Now, let's go back to this idea of first fruits. And some of you are wondering, okay, Pastor Josh, so where do I start? How much am I supposed to give? All right, in verse 12, it says, when you have finished setting aside 1/10 of all of your produce, okay? And again, this idea of 10% shows up a lot, especially in the Old Testament. Even Abraham, right? When he meets the priest king Melchizedek, what does he do? 10% of all he has, he just gives to Melchizedek. Right? And here's the call officially from the book of the law that says, look, 10% you should give. Now, I would say that as we move into the New Testament, that number sort of gets taken away and you're called to just be generous. I actually think that it means to give above 10%. Okay? I think that's the New Testament conception of giving, is above 10%. But I think 10% represents a good benchmark. Okay? And one of the things that, again, as we look at this in the book of the law, one of the things that I want us to become very careful and mindful of is that we are not giving out of obligation. Right? And so if you're going to give 15% of your income in resources to the church, but you're going to grumble and complain about it the whole time, that's not really what the purpose of giving is about. And I would much rather have someone give 1% of their income, but give it generously, saying, you know what, I just don't have a lot, but this is what God is calling me to give, and I'm so excited to see what God is going to do with this thing that I am going to give in that place. And so, friends, again, I hope that we'll use that 10% as a benchmark. But for some of us, we have to grow into that. Because, again, maybe we have to reprioritize the way that we manage our resources. That's part of stewardship. And if we don't have enough to give 10%, then maybe we have to really listen to God and wrestle with, do I need to do things in my life a little bit differently so that I can give more, that I can work towards that benchmark? All right. Now, on the opposite side of things, you know, one of the most amazing stories from Jesus when it comes to money and to giving is the story about the little old lady that gives 2 pennies. Right? And Jesus stops everything right in the middle of the temple, all the commotion, and he says, guys, gather around. Did you just see what just happened? This little old lady gave 2 pennies, and they're thinking, well, that's great. You know, this lady gave 2 pennies, but this guy over here, we rang the trumpets for him because he gave 10,000 talents, you know, and how great is that? And how much more can we do with that? And Jesus says, no, guys, you don't get it. That person gave just a little bit of the abundance that he had, but this woman gave everything she had, and she gave it willingly. She gave it because she trusted in God so much that she was willing to give the last 2 pennies she owned to worship God. And friends, that's why I say that this idea of 10% is simply a benchmark. It's really about the state of your heart, your intention as you give it, as you utilize your resources and say, you know what? God has blessed me with this amount of resources. And whether you have a whole bunch of resources or you have just a little bit of resources, you have the opportunity to manage those in a way that can be very, very powerful. All right. Now, I want to give you a couple of personal examples because one of the things that Sarah and I have done is we've tried to be very obedient in our tithing. Okay. And again, whether we've had, a lot of income or very little income, one of the things we've never argued about or never been willing to compromise is we said, look, we're not going to reduce the amount that we're tithing. And I mean in terms of we're going to give and tithe what we can based on where we are. We're not going to sacrifice this. We're not going to put it off because things come up. It's going to be a priority for our life. And I can tell you that as we have done that, God has just blessed us in an immense way. Okay, again, it's given us the opportunity to go out and to help other people go and do ministry. It's provided us opportunities to go out and do things that we didn't think that we could. And there were times that when the first people from Crew came and asked us, Josh, can you partner with us on a monthly basis? The most that we could offer was $10 at that time. But we gave that $10 a month because that's what we could. And that's what we felt God was in calling us to do. There was also a time in my life when we were younger and my parents found themselves in kind of a challenging financial situation because my mom had lost some work and my dad was trying to get a business going and different things. And I never remember them coming to me, or I'll never forget them coming to me and say, we've committed to tithe, and no matter what we do, we're going to tithe in that moment. And, Josh, there were times that bills came up and we didn't have the money to pay them. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And all of a sudden, the money was in our bank account. I don't know how it got there. I don't know if somebody put it in there. I don't know where it came from, but there was just enough for us to pay those bills when we needed to. And friends, I believe that supernatural and miraculous things like that do and can happen all of the time. And so when we're faithful in giving, even if it's a little bit, we can expect big results from God. Because God doesn't put a limitation. I believe He just looks down on us and says, you know what? You were obedient. You gave because that's what I called you to do. And you didn't worry about it. You put your trust, you put your faith in me. Now watch this. Now, as we move into the New Testament, Paul, in his second letter to the Corinthians, says this: remember, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided to in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Okay? Friends, think of that promise. Think of what it means to lean into that promise and to say, you know what? I don't need to worry. I don't need to control these resources. I'm just simply called to be the best manager of these resources that I have been given. And I'm called to utilize and prioritize them in a way that supports God's kingdom. Okay? And so, friends, think about the power of that. And that's how I would say that's how your first fruit should be given, with a cheerful heart. Now, as I look to wrap up here, as we move on from the rest of verse 12, it says, in the third year, you're going to give a tithe, but you're going to give it to the Levites, the foreigners, the orphans, and the widows, right? And so every third year, there was this special offering that would come around, and it would say, look, there are these people that are on the fringes, that are marginalized in our society, and we have an expectation and an obligation to care for these people. I always envision it as a ladder, right? You in our country or in business, we always have the ladder of success, right? And there's all these people climbing on it. But sometimes there are those people that struggle to climb. And what does it look like to reach down and extend a hand and say, you know what, come on up, let me help you along the way, right? We're not standing there stepping on their fingers or trying to kick them back off the ladder. But no, we extend that hand and say, look, come on up, come be with me, come see what God wants us to do. And so again, friends, sometimes we can get caught up in all of the rules, right? Like again, we're reading a book about the law, which is very specific on what should happen, right? And in fact, much of the language is very reminiscent of what we just did in our offering, right? The plate is brought forth, it's brought to the priest. We say a prayer, we ask God to bless it, we put it on there, we sing a doxology, which praises God, right? It's almost directly the same. And yes, there are certain rules in it, but this also is extended with mercy. And so sometimes when we look at all the rules and all of the things we think we have to, we struggle to see, well, if there's all these rules, if I have to give 10%, how do I know that it goes to support the clothes closet and all these other things that I want it to do? How do I know the pastor just isn't sucking it all up in his salary, right? But friends, what we often struggle to miss is that law and compassion, justice and mercy are two sides of the same coin, right? And they go together, right? And as we look at even the laws in our own life, those laws provide us freedom. Yes, there's rules and obligations, but they provide us freedom, right? So when I come out here and I stop at the stop sign, there's freedom in knowing that if I pull out, somebody's not just going to run into me because they're not going to obey the other stop sign. Right? There's freedom, there's protection in the law. Okay? So those rules are important, but there's also compassion. You know what? Maybe it was my turn out there at that stoplight and this person wanted to go, and I can be mad about it, or I can just say, you know what? Whatever, just go. Quick, it was my turn, but you go. There's compassion, there's grace, and there's mercy. And so again, friends, part of our tithes and giving go to support those that aren't able to give as much. Okay? Now, friends, again, all of this boils down to being an act of worship. It's not meant to be an obligation. Now, there is definitely an expectation, right? Even throughout the whole scriptures, there's an expectation that you're going to give. And whether you look at the Old Testament and say, yes, we're to give 10%, or you go and you look at the book of Acts and they're selling everything they have to give it to each other and care for the people around them. However you look at it, there is an expectation for us as the people of God to give. But we're called to give with a generous and cheerful heart. And that makes a big difference. And friends, think about what it means when we are stewards cheerfully of the resources we give. Right? And we'll talk about this. But think about what it means for us to give money and not worry about it and not seek to control it. You know, I look at our little sister church in New Auburn and think of how much they've been blessed by a lady that hasn't been there in years. And she donated a large amount of financial resources to that church. Right? She said, here, go. I want you to take care of the church. I want you to take care of the community. Think about the people that have passed even from this church and the things that they've provided to continue the ministries and missions or to keep the church upgraded with things that they needed, whether it's new signs or tables or new technology, right? Think about the people that have willingly chosen to serve on committees to make sure that the church can do organized things, that there are ministries available for our kids to go out and do this, that there's Bible studies and teaching events, right? It changes stuff when we think about that as a responsibility and honor, and we do it with the right intention, knowing that really giving is just simply an act of worship, saying, thank you, God, for all that you have given me, and I hope that I'm utilizing these resources to grow your kingdom, and that I am in alignment and obedience to the things that you are calling me to utilize and do with these resources. So friends, as I end, I don't necessarily have hard and fast action steps for you, but I am going to encourage you to wrestle with some questions, and I think if you honestly do that, then you may find that action steps result from those. But the first one is, do you have an owner or a steward mentality?